Welcome back. This is Adam with Adam Reading Edge. Today is this book, Libido Dominandi, which passion to dominate, passion for dominion, I guess, is really what it is. Control, Sexual Liberation and Political Control by E. Michael Jones. It's a thick volume. Packed full of tons of facts and information. The chapter division is by city, location, and date. So, for example, part 1, very first chapter, Ingolstadt, 1776. The next chapter, Paris, 1787. London, 1790. And then it goes all the way up to... There's a big jump between Paris 1821 and then Paris 1885. And then from Paris 1885, he creeps his way up to ultimately Washington, D.C. 1992, and therein it ends. Because the book was published, the first printing is September 2018, but the copyright is in 2000. So he wrote this in the year 2000, and then he only recently published it. This is the paperback. I like paperback over hardcover. Don't ask me why. I just do. It's just a preference. So I wanted to get right into it on just reviewing this book, kind of talk to you a little bit about my thoughts about it, and then just leaving it at that. I don't need this to be a very long review. If you are listening to this, you probably already have an idea what the book is about. So think of this as I think of it as like a history with a bunch of biographies, mini biographies lumped in. And it's an intellectual history. It concerns itself with how did we get to where we are today in terms of a almost post-sexual revolution society. And not only, the sexual revolution dates back farther than the 60s, the 1960s. So how did we get to where we are at? It's actually been a buildup over time with multiple people who have come up with different ideas and learn, there's a reason, ask yourself, why did a sexual revolution ever happen? It seems like, well, everybody was just gaining more and more freedom with many different things, and the sexual culture was just a part of that. But then you kind of, there were huge cultural, there was a lot of cultural conservatism regarding sexual relations for the longest time. I think even when I was a kid, in the 80s, it was still pretty taboo of a thing. Maybe I didn't grow up in the 60s, but it's almost like there had already been a reaction in the 80s and 90s, and then it really seemed to have taken off fairly recently with the internet becoming high speed. So it all began with Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, as all big conspiracies do. Their big discovery was how you could control people through their vices. And then the Marquis de Sade further developed this idea, and he wanted sexual freedom to be part of the French Revolution. And many others through the years just kept developing, mostly independently from each other, this idea that the sexual revolution is an avenue towards social control or political control. So in the very beginning of the book, he talks about an example of political control through the sexual revolution. And his example, which, depending on your age, may or may not strike a chord with you, was he had talked about a certain televangelist, like a an evangelist preacher on TV who was brought down because he had visited a prostitute. So for him, even though sex is, free love, and anybody can have sex outside of marriage and it's not really looked down on, this guy, his career was ruined because it was he's preaching one thing, but then he's living a hypocritical life, and it was believed that he eventually pursued this prostitute because of the kind of pornography that he was into. And I'll get a little bit more into that later. But to give some more modern examples of sexual control, using people's vices also as a way to kind of control them. On the one hand, we make our society this place where everybody is encouraged to fornicate, adultery is not seen as a terrible thing. It still kind of is, but it's not as, I don't know, it seems to happen so often that it's not as threatening to people as it was before. Like, nobody cares if you lots of people cheat all the time. It almost seems a common thing. And the reason why I bring that up is because if you look at modern pickup artist boards, like internet things where guys are talking about ways to get women, the guys who are seasoned, the guys who they've been doing this for a while, they've been around the block, they've had their fun. Those guys they're looking for like your 1950s kind of wife. That's the stereotypical 1950s wife. They're looking for that almost homely Christian woman who is going to be a good mother and wife. Like they don't care about the sexy women anymore because they're like, there's no way those women can be good partners in the long run. So there's this weird reaction that guys are having. Guys who are successful in the mating and dating market, you can kind of tell how rampant things are just by the reaction and what they're now looking for in their special significant other. So I wanted to give you some more modern examples of sexual liberation and falling into political control. Think of rape culture. We don't really live in a society where women have to fear about rape wherever they go. Maybe depending on if you're in a very bad part of town, but for the most part, most cities, most areas are quite safe, and women can travel around freely, and they're not going to be too worried about rape. If there was a true rape culture, would Tinder be very popular? Would these dating apps be very popular? Wouldn't those women be afraid of meeting strange men and possibly being raped? I don't know. It doesn't seem like, if I've heard stories about South Africa and how that really is a rape culture where women do have to fear about that. And then you have the United States, which is pretty darn safe. Same thing in like Canada. Canada is, all the cities, as far as I am concerned, are much safer than where I'm at now. This idea of vague ideas behind consent. It almost seems like if you're a heterosexual person, male, it's much harder to. There's a lot more scary stories circulating now. Before we used to. So to give another example, to explain this example, like back when I was growing up, a typical white suburban guy. I grew up rural and now I'm kind of suburban, but typical suburban guy. And as I was growing up, you didn't really think bad of the police. The police were not bad guys. They were out there protecting, and there was you supported police officers. And then the internet came, and then the internet exposed a lot of violence with the police, not just against minority groups, but against just everyday people. Like there's that recent Recent thing that happened with the UPS driver just being shot and murdered along with the people who stole his vehicle, like right on the highway in mid daylight. So it's almost like um, there are more. So now people are more aware that it could be dangerous. Cops can be dangerous. They can be violent. And there's lots of people who are like, they've always been that way. And if you read stories, cops were always kind of a little bit quick to beat people up and do this or that. There's that whole don't tase me, bro, guy. And there's a lot of stuff out there now. So people, it's rare to find somebody who's totally ignorant and just loves the police anymore because of the internet. Same thing is kind of happening with heterosexual men, and then like the rape culture and the vague ideas of consent, and the guys in college who've been accused of raping. So there's stuff happening and there are precedences being made that are getting a lot of guys worried. And then, of course, to the point where some guys, they'll probably record everything that happens with their interaction. Lots more guys are waking up to the fact that, if a woman attacks you, you basically just got to get the heck out of there. Don't defend yourself, because you will always be seen as the stronger, more dangerous person. And so you will always be the guy arrested. It's just there's some, I forget what it's called, but there's some law, there's some procedure where in a domestic dispute the male is always arrested. So unless he can really prove 100% beyond doubt right then and there that he was not in fact the violent one, even though I think I saw a recent report that women commit more domestic violence than men, which makes sense, because if you can get away with something, you're going to be more apt to do it than if you can't get away with it. You're going to be much more careful. And that's what I mean by makes sense. Logically, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense as a human being to be violent towards other human beings. You got to control yourself. So some of the other things I was thinking about, examples of just some things that I just wanted to talk about after reading this book. So a few more points just about the book itself. The book itself is very, very detailed. It's the kind of book where I would have like a 6-hour talk about it if I took a lot of notes about every chapter and who is talked about and the main points of every chapter. It's just unbelievable how much information there is. There's no way you're going to remember all of it unless you study, live, and breathe this. So it's very, very scholarly, very academic. There's tons of information. I will just read a random paragraph. This is page 261, second paragraph down. I'll just give you an example of the text itself. The counter-revolutionary who attempts to practice virtue violates, whether he knows it or not, the established religion of the revolutionary state, which is the worship of Dionysus. The illusion of the Enlightenment, the illusion which Wilhelm Reich, shared when he formulated his idea of some self-regulating sex economy, is that vice may be harnessed for the general good. Reich's contribution to the political ends of revolution was a technique based on a knowledge of psychology unavailable to revolutionaries like Marx, Engels, and Lenin. We concur, Reich writes, with the opinion of many researchers that all forms of religious mysticism mean mental darkness and narrow-mindedness. We differ from them only in terms of our serious determination to combat mysticism and superstition successfully and to convert our knowledge into hard practice. And then just goes on. Like, this is the kind of book that I could reread and I'll be like, I don't remember that, but that makes a lot of that's a good point. Or I'll be like, oh, I don't remember that guy, but that's a good point. Or it's like that over and over and over again. So it's so full of information that I can't do justice doing a review. So I'm just going to talk about just some like you have to read it for yourself. and then reread it and then take notes. If I ever reread this, I would take notes chapter by chapter, detailing who's the person talked about, what were some of the main points, what stood out to me, what are some of the facts and data, and try to condense this 600-page book down to maybe like 30 pages of notes, which that'd be quite the task, but I guess because I'm not a public intellectual, I'm not somebody I'm not teaching a history class, I'm not teaching much. I'm just reviewing books and kind of, being like, hey, this is worth reading or this isn't worth reading. This is what I got out of it. That's kind of my purpose here. But it's very, very dense. So there was a point in here about the best way to control a man is without his awareness. He identifies his passions as his own. Okay, so if you control men with the gun pointed at them and they realize that they have the gun pointed at them, then they know that you are the one making them do what it is you want them to do. But if you control him without him realizing you're doing anything, and you control him through his sexual passions, the reason why there's a sexual revolution and not a eating revolution or a sleeping sloth revolution. The reason why there's a sexual revolution is because it's a very easy passion to inflame and develop. So, and mankind, every individual man identifies his sexual passion as his own thing. He thinks it's all within him, that nobody is controlling him through it. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this, and you tell me if this describes something if this sounds familiar to you or realistic, if this sounds like reality to you. Have you ever, you yourself or someone you know or a story you've read or heard, have you ever gone down a rabbit hole with pornography? So, did you ever find a situation where you had to watch increasingly hardcore stuff in order to achieve the same feeling you had when you first discovered your own sexuality? And a brief side note here, how many people as children today first discover pornography? It's so easy to get pornography on the high-speed internet. How many children are exposed before they really even hit puberty? And as they're hitting puberty, how many of them are exposed? Because not every parent is going to be extremely strict, and then kids will have access to what other kids might have. Like, you might not give your kid a smartphone or a tablet, but some other kid might have been given a smartphone and tablet by their parent who didn't really try that hard raising that kid. And then in the bathroom at school or on the playground, that kid, shows him the thing. Because kids like to shock each other. Kids like to think they're older than they are. And I remember on the school bus just in the 90s, kids who had any experience at all, and we're talking kids, they would be talking about it to other kids. And other kids would be like, whoa, no way. And it would be weird. It'd be a bit uncomfortable. But as a kid, because you're just imagining it in your head, as I was at that time, it doesn't mean anything to you. Whereas today, kids could be like, look at this, and then just show some ridiculous hardcore porn, not even like softcore stuff, but just straight up hardcore. And then how many movies do people allow their kids to watch that these days just have straight up hardcore sex in them, or just images of naked bodies, and just things that, because I'm a parent, I'd be very uncomfortable having my daughter, who's still quite innocent, seeing any of that stuff. And I get nervous about her going to school. I can't homeschool her in my situation, but I get nervous about her going to school because, I don't want her to lose her innocence too early. Back in the day, think back way back in the day, if you lived in a rural, farm community and you worked on the farm, like most people, they got married pretty young, right? So you just took care of that passion right away. and nothing but what no pornography existed to inflame that passion. So let me get into this a little bit more, because this is kind of what I was thinking about. Because what I'm thinking about is sort of the end product of all the build up in here. But what I'm thinking about is like if you suddenly you follow the NoFap community, which is a secular anti-porn, anti-masturbation community, which is interesting. That's strange and interesting that such a community exists. It's a reaction to people kind of somehow suspecting that pornography is more, it's worse than you think, its effect on you. So try this. If you go without viewing porn for a week, 2 weeks, a month, and you also withhold pleasuring yourself, if you withhold that for a while, you kind of reprogram your brain yourself. You will actually, if you suddenly then just jump back into pornography, you will find that you don't need, you've cleansed yourself of the hardcore stuff that you wanted before. So, all right, what does that tell us? What does that say to you? What does that say to me? That tells me that it is control. It is a way of controlling you without you being aware. Now let me give you an example of let me just give you an example from my own life. As growing up, being exposed to this or that pornography, you get kind of an idea of what your perfect girl would look like. And so because of that, you were often disappointed with the reality that was before you. As such, even though I was no Casanova, I was not anything special, I wasn't bringing anything to the table myself, I wasn't willing to date anybody at my level because of what was in my mind from pornography. It changed what I was attracted to. And then it gave me this idea of my idea of like the perfect woman, and then that's all that was good for me. That's all I wanted. Conversely, what that ended up happening is you date nobody, because A, those women are extremely rare in the population, or just, there are many, many, many just attractive, normal women in the population that you just suddenly are no longer attracted to. I mean, just think about how ridiculous some of these things popping up on Instagram are. Like these cat girls. Yeah, guys are into like anime like they're not even into real life girls. They're into like cartoon characters and stuff, and video game characters and things like that. So you start to see how, if you end up making pornography extremely easy to get because you have high-speed internet and you can easily find free, unlimited pornography anywhere on the internet, super easily. In the past, like, you had to wait for one image to download, and then before that there were magazines, and there might have been like VHS tapes and stuff like that, but it was not like it is today, or has been for maybe the last 15, 20 years. So there's an entire generation of men who have grown up just inundated in it. And I worry about how many men who are just early exposed to this stuff, how it warps their idea of what women are, and then they can't even, let's say they do get a girlfriend, they can't even be satisfied with her and have a good relationship with her in the bedroom or wherever, because it's just not the same high as what they were getting from unlimited amounts of pornography. If they were addicted to it, and it's extremely addictive, especially to young men. Like, I was in my early 30s before I really got a good handle over all that. It took a long time, because it's just when you're really young and all that stuff is extremely intense and really takes a grip on you, you are in bondage to it. You are a slave to it. whether you like it or not. And that's why you have the nofap community, because guys know that it's extremely difficult to rid yourself of it. And then they celebrate being rid of it. You know, they'll be like, I've gone 60 days, I've gone 90 days, I've gone 360 days, I've seen like 500 days, stuff like that. Guys are celebrating it. And they're celebrating it because they realize, you know, that they were viewing the world, and, you know, they're free of their chains, their fetters, you know. They were looking at the world in the wrong way. So it's it transforms your passions. Sex is not as thrilling because, you know, most of the things that you might have been thought you were into. I should say that you are not into those things. You thought you were into those things because of pornography, but it turns out you are not into those things, because if you suddenly unplug from all that, you would be more than satisfied with just regular human relations with the opposite sex. So that's just kind of, that's one thing that I just wanted to talk about, because we don't, I mean, people have to go on the internet, they have to go to weird people or you know, non-mainstream people in order to hear about stuff like this, to read about stuff like this. So this is a non-mainstream book. It's full of facts, full of information, full of data. There's a lot of disgusting things in it. There's a lot of really horrible people, and if you hear the stories about them, it's, you know, the old saying, truth is stranger than fiction. Like, there's weirdos from, you know, the 20th century, early 20th century, and then, of course, the 19th century. There are some weirdos that were really messed up, but thought that this was the way to go, because they wanted political change. They wanted political control. And this was, sexual liberation was an avenue to that. Today, we're kind of like seeing the almost depopulation program results of it. We're seeing the political control in terms of the vague consent laws, the divorce laws, the what else had I said there? The whole rape culture stuff, you know, making dating a very, finding somebody to start a family with almost a difficult task, which I think is why guys are not, why they're fantasizing about having that 50s kind of Christian, good Christian wife. They're fantasizing about that because that's like the safest option to them. Whereas before, in the past, guys fantasized about the bombshell blonde and you know, the very sexy woman, the model, and so forth. It's like, no, you want to stay away from those people now, because they're gonna cry rape, they're going to divorce you, they're going to cheat on you, etc. But and then you don't want a woman who's been active in the Tinder community and the hookup culture. Like, there are probably women who have been with as many men as a prostitute would be. And would you want to marry or date or marry a prostitute? Well, that's universally usually been frowned upon from men, unless they're very desperate. In which case, they're usually, they have some self-preservation instinct to not marry somebody like that, for fear of what could possibly happen. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going to leave this. That's one thing that he doesn't talk about much in this, but living through sort of the after effects of the sexual revolution, since it was successfully implemented, we're living in the effects of it just droning on, and then the power of the internet infused into it, and how much that has damaged people. I think every millennial man, every millennial and every Generation Z has been touched by and affected by internet pornography, and I think it's damaged so many of us that we didn't even realize it. That's the thing. You didn't even realize you're being damaged. You sensed something was wrong, but like the Christian community I grew up with, they didn't they didn't know why it was like their idea of why it was bad is just sex is wrong, which is not a good idea in and of itself, because if you put in somebody's head that just all sex is wrong, then when they get married, they're still going to have issues having sex. That's when it's supposed to be right. That's when it's supposed to be good and a-okay and go get them. And some Christians do that, but there are Christians who still struggle with the idea that it's sinful, even when they are married. And so I never found any of the Christian version of NoFap when I was growing up. That was never effective, and you just felt guilty, felt bad about yourself. Shame doesn't work. Maybe shame from a community. Shame just causes people to hide stuff, but shame, in my experience, and with people I've talked to that were also struggling, it doesn't work. There has to be some other reason why you would stop. So, for instance, like an example of something else, I stopped drinking alcohol because A, it just made me feel sleepy, and B, I had read that it lowers your testosterone, and I don't like feeling drowsy. Especially a few hours before bed, because that's my only free time. I want to get stuff done. So I don't like feeling drowsy, and I don't like I don't like the idea of my testosterone levels lowering because of a drink. So I stopped drinking. Same thing with once you realize that your addiction to pornography will affect your relationships, your ability to even enjoy having a sexual relationship with a woman. Once you realize that you're actually damaging yourself, your perception of joy, that you will never find fulfillment in another person if you're addicted to stuff that's inflamed your passions beyond their natural levels, okay? So you have a certain level of passion, you have a certain level of desire, but it's extra stimulated beyond what you're naturally would be at. So you should be at here, but your addiction to pornography puts you way up here, so nothing's ever going to achieve that. And so that's why you keep going back to the pornography. You have to cold turkey come off of it like it's a drug, because it is a drug to you, and bring yourself back down, and then stay off of it as best you can. It's not easy. It's super hard. That's why there are support communities like I said, the NoFap community. I don't think it's right. I think the people in that community are misguided when they think of a relapse as a shameful thing, because you got to get this through your head. You got to get through this through your mind. This is some mentor advice from me to you. You are a sexual person. All people, there are a few asexual people, but most people are sexual. Okay, let's just get over that. All right, just get over your hang-ups about it. It took me a long time to get over it. I was in my 30s when I finally got over it. But you got to realize, no matter who you are, no matter what you think about yourself or other people, you are a sexual person, and you have to be okay with that. This doesn't mean go hog wild with all the pornography and all mess around as much as you can. I don't mean that. I mean you have to accept the fact that like you're a water-based human being. You need to drink water, right? You need to accept the fact that you need to eat plants. You need to accept the fact that you should be eating meat, although I know there are arguments against that. But you need to accept the fact that you are a sexual person. You're always going to have that desire. You can't kill that desire in yourself. You're always going to have the desire. So you need to develop a healthy mindset of what it means to you, what you realistically want to get out of that, and what could possibly be harming that. So, we need to drink water, and so soda has water in it. But if you just drink soda and get your water through that, that's not good for you, because there's harmful things in that. Whereas, you can get calories from sugar, But you can eat desserts and get all your calories for the day from desserts, but that's not really good for you. So same thing with this fight against pornography. And I mentioned pornography because it's such a, with the high-speed internet of our day and age, and the fact that anybody can, you don't even have to clear your browser history and use your computer. People just use their phones, whatever, and then that's, you just lock it out so nobody can access your phone ever. And it's up to you. You're on your own, right? Your community cannot save you from it. You're on your own. So because it's so prevalent, that's why I kind of stayed on this topic a little bit. But I do recommend this book if you want to find out how things got to the point that they are today, and kind of is there a reasoning behind this rather than just, oh, it's liberation, everybody can just do whatever they want. Is there a possible ulterior motive underneath it? Are there people in the world that have existed and that exist today who see free pornography, who see access to that as good for them, bad for the people who get addicted on it, but that means that they can have control over that population? Because every young guy in the world is going to get addicted. I only knew one guy who wasn't addicted, and I didn't believe him. I didn't believe him. I just thought he just was not willing to admit it, and he stuck with that. And he seemed asexual, but he did eventually get married, so obviously some kind of desire there. I just didn't believe him. But I only met one person. Everybody else that I ever met, talked to, had struggled with it. And now it's not even just Christian guys, secular guys, atheists, all sorts of people are struggling with it. So this book, so this is my final point, and I hope you stayed this long because this is a very good point that'll help you in this battle. Once you realize why something is, it's a lot easier to fight against it. So once you have all this information about why the sexual revolution is, why it's so easy for you to have access to pornography and how that affects you. Once you know why, it's a lot easier to be to fight against it, because that's there for a reason. It's to control you. It's to alter your state so that you're more controllable, and that you're not doing the regular civilizational things. It's a barrier between you just having a regular healthy relationship with somebody and having a family, having a life, a fulfilling sexual life, so you're not constantly desiring better circumstances for yourself, and jumping from woman to woman to woman and never getting your fix unless you're with somebody who's totally crazy and then they do something for you that you like, but that person is no good for you. You've actually thrown to the waste bin all of the people who really would have made your life better, but they just weren't sexy enough for you, whatever. Once you know the why, you know how to battle it. You know the reason behind it. You have a strategy. You have an understanding how they're trying to control you, how it's affected you, and so now if you want a more fulfilling life, if you want to get rid of that bondage, those chains, you know what to do. All right, so keep reading, everybody. Order this book, although it's super expensive on Amazon and eBay right now. There is a potential possibility. Don't despair. I'm selling this one, $700. I'm just kidding. No, you should. They're going to print more. He's going to print more, Michael Jones. All right, so that's everything I have for you. Have a good day.